Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. I do apologize for the delay. Had some little technical difficulties, turned out to be on my end. My bad. All right. So if you are new to this channel, but you would like to be part of the solution to our education woes, please consider subscribing to this channel if you're not already subscribed. And even if you are already subscribed, could you double check that you still are? Because sometimes YouTube decides for you. And if you wouldn't mind recommending this channel to others who are interested in learning more about education so they can be better armed to defend their kids and their rights, I would appreciate that. I would also like to invite you to please like and share this broadcast. We are recording this live. So if you're watching the replay, thank you. But if you're here live, you can bring your questions. Please share this with others so they can come and join us. And also, I would like to ask you to consider subscribing, joining my Discord community at wokescreen.com/the reason we learn. That is a one-stop shop for all content related to the reason we learn. You also get discounts on tutoring and things like that. I have homeschooling resources, all kinds of great things, discounts on merchandise. And there is even a parent support group at The Reason We Parent off of that website, which meets twice a week. And we talk about all the things you need to talk about to get your kids a good education. So I hope you consider that. Today, I have a great show for you. My guest has been here before. Her name is Justine Deterling. She's an LGBT human rights activist and founder of Gender Health Query, a medical and queer theory watchdog organization with a focus on same-sex attracted youth. The site provides extensive information on many topics related to pediatric medical transition of gender dysphoric youth and the impacts of contemporary gender ideology. Gender Health Query members would like people to join them in opposing indoctrinating school children and teens into radicalization and unscientific worldviews around sex and gender. They have released a pro-parental rights document with well-researched and well-articulated reasons why gender activism in schools is inappropriate and harmful. It may help inform educators or be useful at public meetings. So the link to the website is in the description, and we do hope that you will go there and avail yourself of the resource. But I've asked Justine to come here and talk with us more about that, as well as more about the issue in general. It's so very important that we fight back against these activist-controlled institutions because they are a wider cultural problem, and we must reverse this trend. So thank you for joining us today. Please join me in welcoming my guest, Justine Deterling. Hello.
Hello, Deb.
Thank you so much for coming back. I'm so excited.
Oh, it's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. I know that this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I was bringing up a quote I want to read to start off with, but yes, please.
Well, I was going to say, this has been a long time coming. I remember when we last spoke, you mentioned you were working on something, and I know you have been diligently, just hard at work on this new initiative, and I'm just so grateful that you have done it, and I'm excited to hear all about it, but please read your quote.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
So, don't like seeing an extremist teacher on social media with a serious lack of self-awareness? Neither do we. Send our document to relevant school officials without having to waste personal time typing up arguments and providing citations. We've done it for you.
Awesome. So that is so great, because you know what parents ask me for all the time? They're like, I want to fight back, but every time I say this isn't right, this isn't appropriate, you know what they say?
Right.
What do you know? You're not a doctor. You're not a therapist. You don't know anything, right? And that's after they call you a bigot.
Yes, correct. And so we have several versions of our document. And if something inappropriate is going on in a school, there are varying lengths. And so it's really available to shoot off to school officials, maybe a school counselor, inform a principal about why you don't like a certain lesson plan or the way that a teacher is behaving. So our document is 10 myths that are enabling ideological gender activism in schools. And everything has a bunch of citations. There are very clearly laid out arguments with pictures and quotes and extensive endnotes. One version is very long. It's probably 80 pages plus endnotes. Another version is closer to 25 pages long. That's more of a summary version. And then there's another one that's just the 10 myths and a QR code. So what I plan to do when I see a particular incident that I don't like, that we all often see on social media, is to send our document to all of the publicly available emails at that school. And this is just part of the information battle that's going on. And everybody just needs to do their part to try to peck away at the concept that telling children there are dozens of genders is a good idea, that telling children they can just identify into whatever they want is a good idea, that providing children with rainbow sparkle books that in no way inform them about the dramatic side effects that happen when you medically transition. And we need to all oppose that this is a good idea to market this in schools to children and teenagers.
Now, I did want to ask you something because I know that one problem parents are having when they want to push back on this, like even when they have information like what you're offering in bits and pieces and so on, is that there seems to be a shift now from strictly talking about issues around gender dysphoria, or rather trans kids, what they call trans kids. And it's moving now into queer theory. So we had gender theory. And then now what I'm finding is that parents are telling me that even if they try to take the approach that this is, erasing homosexuality, that it's actually hostile and homophobic, which we can point to certain things about how it is. What ends up happening is we're told that it's about queer, and that, so I think people are confused. They don't want to feel like they're being homophobic. They don't want to say anything, that would sound homophobic or be homophobic. The whole movement seems to be homophobic. And then the teachers, the counselors will turn around and talk about queer kids. So they'll kind of change, they'll move the goalpost from the kids who say they're a different gender to just saying, well, they're queer. And all kids are really queer. And queer, of course, doesn't mean anything to do with sexuality necessarily, or even anything to do with some concept of gender. It's like, they're just not what you want them to be. Get over it. And I think what parents are struggling with is kind of parsing all of this and saying, okay, I've got what I need to fight back against the gender indoctrination, this gender theory stuff. And then they just come back at me with, get over it. Your days are over. The heteronormative, cis, blah, 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 we're queer. And that's what it is. And of course, parents are like, now what do I do?
And these are school officials that are telling them this?
Yeah, there would be teachers, counselors. We protect queer kids. I'm seeing a shift in moving from trans kids to queer. And the teachers are saying, well, I'm queer too. And then you find out like, wait, but you're a woman, you're married to a man. And aren't you, don't you have, no, but I'm queer, so it's like, what it is seems to be code for is just a way to shit shine communism. I mean, honestly, that it's like anything that's not capitalist, anything that's not Western, anything that's not the norm, they're just now calling queer. But once they do that and have this giant umbrella, then it feels sometimes like we come back with science and their attitude is, yeah, none of that matters anyway, because everybody's queer. So get out of our face. And all we're teaching is the reality that there's no such thing as heterosexuality. And you're like, now where do I go? So this is what I'm hearing from parents lately, is this kind of new shift from gender to queer. And most people don't know what to do.
Well, I believe that that's very intentional because the gender movement infiltrates and parasitizes everything around it. So in particular, feminist institutions and even just all women's institutions, even if they're not explicitly feminist. And it also has parasitized the gay and lesbian rights movement. But there is more to this supposed rainbow activism than just the gender issue. our document definitely focuses on the gender issue specifically because there's so many problems there. The whole queer theory influence is a slightly larger umbrella of which the gender issues are under that. And that's also responsible for some of the overly sexualized materials that you see in school libraries where the kids are way too young for that, and subsuming everything in this social justice Marxist ideology. And that way of thinking of sort of queering everything is an academic philosophy, and it has intensely influenced education, where all of these teachers go to get educated and certified. So this has trickled into the culture, and it's a very bad movement. And many of the people in it are heterosexuals. Many of the teachers who are pushing it are heterosexuals, but not all of them. Some of them are particularly gay men or lesbians, and they're often trans identified. And in defense of my minority group, I'm a bisexual in a lesbian marriage. My spouse is a lesbian. Many times in history, all kinds of different people have been sucked into very, very, very bad ideas. And it's very easy to push certain emotional buttons like personal freedom, inclusivity, individual rights. And then, especially when you're enforcing it with a suicide narrative and messaging of life saving care, it's very easy to manipulate a very large number of people to think that this is a good thing. And that's what's happened first with the gay men and lesbians that have gone along with this agenda within the gay rights organizations that are now all LGBTQ, but also just look at on the left generally. They have pushed the right buttons. Unpushing them is going to be very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to address all these other problems with the inappropriateness of these drag queen story hours, etc. This document is focused on gender, but we're not necessarily done yet.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
I
So,
can
I mean,
speak more specifically to what you said about the queering as well. I have a
yeah,
couple quotes from our document that
yeah,
address.
but I hope, I mean, I don't know that I was really that articulate in trying to explain what I was saying. And what I guess I mean is that I feel like parents, not enough, but more and more parents are starting to educate themselves. They want to be ready because, they love their kids and they want to be ready in case somebody comes to them and says, your kid is going to die unless you do this thing, so they want to be able to push back and get their child their proper care if the child is confused, if the child, it has something going on that they're labeling as being gender related. I think parents are trying to get ahead of that between Abigail Schreier's book and Logan Lansing's book. People are trying to figure it out. But I just have noticed lately that the queer component seems to be confusing them. Like, where does that fit? And especially the parents who, consider themselves to be liberal or classically liberal. In other words, they're very accepting of lesbian and gay people, gay marriage. They definitely don't. I won't use the A word, a lie, whatever. But they're people who are kind of like live and let. I'd never cared about any of that. But I don't want my child to medically, I don't want the transitioning thing going on while my child is a child. So then it feels like for that audience that might be more susceptible to yet another thing, they're starting to hear your child is exploring their queerness. And then you start hearing about queer stuff, and no, don't worry. It's just, they're just exploring their sexuality. They're exploring their identity. They're exploring their gender. And you need to just back off and let them do it. And the problem I see there, and tell me if you think I'm being paranoid, is that when a child socially transitions, let's say the teachers and the counselors label it as exploratory cross dressing, like the boy is saying he's a girl this week or whatever, but he's exploring his queer identity. And they're not saying he is a girl. So that kind of social move has a tendency to nudge them closer to the medicalization and the gender problem. So what I've noticed is some of the people who are very into that movement are kind of pushing back on parents using the queer thing. Like it's exploration, it's personal expression, back off. And those parents are very willing to do that. They're like, okay, so it's just exploration and we're just being tolerant. Okay, that's fine. And next thing you know, another month or two goes by. So people are trying not to be reactionary and then they get socially transitioned right under their nose. And I feel like they're just pushing back with everything they've got.
Yes, that's what's going to happen. So that dynamic, in my opinion, is happening due to people that have an excessively high level of trait openness, and they are largely overrepresented in the helper professions, particularly education. They are so open-minded, their brains are falling out of their head. And that's, you described perfectly what that is. They simply have no concept of the need for grounding in certain realities. They have no concept of structure, and they have no concept that we should value an intact, healthy, functioning endocrine system. So these people have no concept of any of those things. This is a culture war.
Right.
That's it. This is a culture war. All the facts are out there. Anyone can read that it's very suspect that medical transition significantly reduces mental health problems or suicide ideation in adolescents. Okay, that information's out there.
Right.
And all the information that a lot of pre-gay and lesbian kids used to outgrow gender dysphoria if they weren't affirmed is out there. The information about the high rates of mental illness among people who identify as non-binary, it's all out there. So this really, truly is a worldview difference war, a culture war. That's what this is.
Right.
And we see which side of the culture war is possessing teachers. So I hate to turn so many teachers into the enemy, but this is structurally what the educational system has become, unfortunately, right up into, national institutions and international institutions.
Well, I think after a point, this has been discussed so much, and there's so much material out there challenging this weird new status quo that I don't think anyone can pretend to be ignorant anymore. In other words, they know it's controversial. They can't act like this is mainstream. Everybody loves it. Because people have been screaming and yelling. The problem is the narrative goes that the only people who oppose it are right wing, homophobic, turf, like all the negative stuff. And that's obviously not true at all. There's a sizable percentage, as you point out, of the LGBT community that's just outraged. There are even trans people who are, adults who are like, wait a minute, what's not in my name? Don't do this. And they're appalled. So I don't think ignorance works anymore. And that's why I tend to lean towards I think they're caught up in a kind of a cult mentality of we are in the right and you are in the wrong for some kind of mystical reason that has nothing to do with reality. And I think that's what parents are finding is the toughest thing to fight because it's infected their own children. So in other words, even if we could say, all right, I'm just going to avail myself of the law and science and facts and my rights and everything to keep the teachers at bay and the counselors from getting their mitts on my kid, because it's everywhere. It's on social media. It's all over the place, TikTok, etc. You'll have your own children coming home and saying, why are you so close-minded, mom and dad? And you're hateful and you're this, even if they themselves are not saying that they're caught up in it. Like, look, I know I'm a girl, but my friend is this and my friend is that. And then parents are finding like, I'm a stranger in my own home. My kids are like, they truly believe this stuff. And I feel like until we get the majority of the schools to stop doing this and actually admit we were wrong, like this is wrong, we have to stop doing it, the kids are going to keep asking for it. And then you have weak adults who are like, well, the kids want it.
Oh, yeah, that's the problem. That's why this has to be stopped in schools. I think you summed it up there perfectly. And I do believe that gender activism, and then its associated queer activists as well.
Yeah.
I do believe it is a cult dynamic. I went on Stephanie Wynn's podcast. I went through a whole list of 20 reasons why that is. It
Right.
ticks many boxes of a cult dynamic, and I do think it's more important now more than ever for people to articulately state why that is and provide examples and to push back.
Right.
But I would like to take a step back on a couple
Sure.
of things, if you don't mind, and then I wanna get into how it is there are cult dynamics involved and
Sure.
indoctrination is involved, but I would like to just point out a few things first. Is that
Okay.
okay?
Yeah, that's great. And then I want to go to some of the questions because we have some questions
Oh,
that people have for
wonderful.
you.
Right. Okay, so our project is several PDFs on a website. I've mentioned that there are different versions. If you want to go to a school board meeting, you can print out the one that's only a QR code and the 10 myths. And that way you will have something that you didn't have to type up yourself. So go to FedEx, print out 20 copies, uh, you're good to go. So we want to make things easy for people and make it easy for people to just grab something without having to type up long emails with long arguments, with all of these citations. It's very wasteful of time, particularly if you have mouths to feed and jobs to do. So we received endorsements from other groups, and I would like to give them credit and thank them. Some are probably more conservative and other ones maybe more leftist. So Canadian Gender Report is an endorser. Coach Linda Blade, who's been working to protect female sports, is an endorser. Fourth Wave Now, a skeptical website that was one of the early adopters of the idea that a lot of this is bad. LGB Alliance USA, an LGB human rights organization. Our Duty, many of your listeners might be familiar with them. They are active in pushing back against radical gender activism and medicalization. Partners for Ethical Care, Parents Defending Education. They have pretty amazing documentation of a lot of this inappropriate material in schools. I recommend going there to check it out. Paradox Institute is a really amazing pro-science website. They have very good arguments about, not arguments even, just going over correct scientific information about sex and gender. And Stephanie Wynn. So thank you to them, and I want to thank them for their support. I'm going to be speaking as myself today because I don't want to put words in other people's mouths. This is a group effort. This is a community effort. And all of us who are concerned about this from various backgrounds are a community. And we do need to push back. And there's 10 different myths, and people can look at them right there. And I'll just give a couple of examples so I don't get into dry reading of lots of things. But myth 1 is gender taught in schools is evidence-based and progressive. Teachers would never introduce material in schools that are harmful to students or damaging to parental rights. So that's one example. The next myth focuses on the medical side effects. There's myth 3 that says gender identity activism doesn't negatively impact other people when we know that it negatively impacts women, children, and gay people in multiple ways. Gender is a spectrum and biology doesn't matter is myth number 5. There are several others. You get the idea. We try to cover the expanse from the social impacts to the medical impacts to the societal impacts. And myth number 10 is, I know this is bad, but gender activism in schools, laws, and society is inevitable and will be the new accepted cultural norm. So why bother opposing it? And you touched on the morphing of this a little bit. Yes, this is a cultural battle, and we will just have to see. So that is some examples from the top 10 gender activism myths that make good people promote bad ideas and policy. So hopefully that can be available for people that want to send off some arguments to their PTA, their school counselor, their school board meeting without spending hours typing something up.
Well, we are very grateful to you for that because that does happen a lot where people are like searching and printing and then they look like they're standing all alone, like they did it themselves. And we already know there's a whole, oh, I did my own research bias, right? So here, with all your endorsements and all of the footnotes or endnotes and all of this, it's not just, hi, I'm a parent who did my own research, where they can easily write you off, but I'm pulling research that has been done by people who are professionals and have a lot of experience in this and so on. And it's endorsed by people with even more than that. So I really appreciate that you are sharing this with us. I did want to go through some of these because, some of them are comments, some of them are questions. I'll just go ahead and read them out. If you have anything to say to the ones that are comments, feel free. But Tony Baloney says the whole LGBT blah, 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 is just a way to get people to not have children, depopulation, and destroy the family unit. And the LGBTQ has similar goals as the UN climate agenda. Do you have any thoughts on these ideas? Because there are people responding to this believing that as well. Like, this is part of a plan. What is your take?
That's true of every leftist movement. That's true of BLM. That's true of feminism. Yes, there are very radicalized leftist people in all of these social justice movements. So I guess you could maybe blame Black people for radicalization of BLM, and I guess you could blame women for leftist radicalization around women's issues, and I guess you could blame gender dysphoric people and gay people for this radicalization around LGBTQ issues.
Right.
I don't think that's particularly helpful. I think
Right.
we have to compartmentalize these radical movements and agendas, explain what's wrong with them, and support arguments as rationally as we can to try to influence the people who can be salvaged into a more reasonable approach to these
Right.
identity and politics issues. And I also want to go back to how entire societies have been ideologically possessed by bad ideas. That includes Christian societies. I can give examples of the Salem witch trials.
Sure.
I could give many more examples of religious derangements that have murdered people. So this is a thing in human beings. They get captured, buttons get pressed, they get captured by bad ideology.
Right.
Left-wing social justice activism has been incredibly effective in pushing the right buttons and capturing everything up into the UN.
Well, I think the common denominator.
Big war. This is an
Yeah.
entire culture war. I'm going back to that.
I
And
think
even if you send our materials to these schools, even though we're principled and our arguments are well in order, we are on referenced by the Southern Poverty Law Center.
right.
Okay? Yeah. So
Yes.
this is big. So I'll be quiet now. Thank you for letting me.
No, that's okay. But what I wanted to say, I was thinking of it when you were talking about people could blame these people. I think the common denominator we have to focus on are the ideas, and it's really one idea, which is collectivism. Anytime, which is just another fancy word for tribalism. Anytime, well, that's not true. Tribalism is collectivism. So collectivism is this idea that we think as a hive. We think as a group. And I heard it from some of the protesters at Vanderbilt the other day, where they said they think like individuals, pointing at the administrators of the college. We think as a collective. Well, obviously no one thinks as a collective, but if you're going to do that, you're outsourcing your morality, you're outsourcing your actual thought process to, what does the group think today? And there's always somebody strongest in the group to say, we think this. Then you are going to look for scapegoats. It's going to be an us and them type of, this big lie that there's an us and a them. There isn't. And then you start labeling people. And my frustration, I guess, is that as we fight the bad ideas, we have to be very careful not to engage in the same behaviors and thought processes of the people with the bad ideas. In other words, no, we don't blame women for the bad ideas that took over feminism. We don't blame LGBT people for the bad ideas that took over the gay rights movement. We don't, you know what I mean? We look at the ideas and then the behaviors. So if you see people behaving in ways that are antithetical to individual liberty, then it seems to me that's what you focus on, is those behaviors and those ideas, and refute them with better ideas and with facts, rather than getting into like competing tribes. Because then all you do is make the war bigger. You don't actually win it. And that's my take on it. And it kind of speaks to the next comment, which was, Do you have thoughts on separating LGB from the rest of the chemical formula and the rest of the letters? Seems we had reached a tranquil point in society until more letters groups were added. It seems the TQI are much more subversive. And I'm kind of speaking to that there was nothing inherently political of a side. In other words, just because most people who supported gay rights happen to be farther to the left, that doesn't mean there weren't gay Republicans, gay libertarians, right? Lesbian of any particular. That didn't define your political views. Am I correct in saying that it used to be kind of separate? Like, yes, I'm gay or I'm lesbian or I'm bisexual, but that you can't infer from that automatically how I feel about taxation, for example.
Well, that also relates to how I feel about slippery slope arguments, because sometimes they're valid in some ways. Saying that there was a slippery slope with TQ and gay rights is legitimate in the sense that the progression of things was that radical gender identity activists took over organizations. And then also the more normies went and got married and lived in their neighborhoods or those suburbs. And the more radical, disordered people took over all of this. However, gender is not the same thing as gay marriage. So it's just like the suffragette movement is not the same as toxic feminists going after anyone who believes there are biological differences between men and women. So each step on a slippery slope needs to be argued on its own merits. So, and then I want to address what you said about the ideas. There are people culpable, though. I do think the culpable people should be blamed. I would love to find a way to hold them accountable. I don't think that that's going to happen. I see teachers doing things where I think they should be fired for educational malpractice. I've definitely seen health professionals and doctors doing things where they should be fired for negligence and malpractice.
Right.
I don't think much of that's going to happen. I would love to see more accountability. I don't think we're going to get that. So you're correct in that we need to focus on the ideas, but
and the behaviors. So what you're speaking to are behaviors that flow from the obvious. Ideas have consequences. So if you are a teacher and you hold fast to these bad ideas, you're going to do things as a consequence. And absolutely, I'm with you. I think some of the people should be in prison. But and being a teacher is different than being female, right? So what I'm saying is, I would hate to see, and I do see it, unfortunately, I see people in social media saying, it's women's fault that we have the trans activists, whatever. Or when people are pointing fingers and saying, if it weren't for you, this wouldn't be happening. And what I feel like they're doing is they're taking this kernel of truth that you had the feminist movement, then you had radical people within the feminist movement, and some of them went like too far and got very politically radical, embraced a whole bunch of things. Like you said, minds too open, the brains fell out, and perhaps facilitated things that might not have had that oxygen level before. But to indict every person with double X chromosomes seems a bit much.
Well, we wouldn't have probably had the concentration camps or Attila the Hun or various other genocides without men. So,
right. I mean,
yeah, you can say that. And then we also have very good things that have happened because of men. So
right.
I'm not twisting that because I'm not here for the battle between the sexes. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I don't want it to get reduced to that is my point. I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a problem. There's a fuzzy line between holding things accountable and recognizing social movements and recognizing who's pushing them might be part of these various cohorts.
Right.
And then having just an umbrella blame of everything. So it's dicey. Society is complicated. Either side that are authoritarians likes to push and have their way. And holding the more reasonable place in the middle is proving to be very difficult. It seemed like, I think we were in a pretty good place maybe in the 80s and 90s. You sort of had Reaganism and some liberals didn't like him, and you just, civil rights had happened. So there's maybe the 90s, it was a little bit of more of a balance than what we're seeing now. I don't know how you hold the balance. It's not easy. It's a constant battle. People are in constant power struggles, and the very worst people often are up grabbing for that power more than the average person.
Right. Well, and the incentives are there too. I noticed in some of the in some of the comments even that people have made the point that, teachers will just keep their mouth, even if they disagree, they keep their mouth shut to get their paycheck. And there will be a certain percentage, probably a lot, who will. Same with doctors. We're seeing doctors do ridiculous things. Like, why don't they speak up? Well, they give all these incentives. So I think as long as the incentives are aligned with going along with this, and those incentives can be social, like you're going to be ostracized, you're going to, no one's going to, you're going to lose all your friends, your family, people are going to call you names. They can be professional. You're going to get fired. Our corporate policy is X, and if you say a word against it, you're fired. That's that Maoist cultural revolution of, if you better toe the line culturally or bad things are going to happen to you. And so I think people falsely believe they're in the minority when it comes to these ideas, and they're not. I think most people would look at what you've produced and say, oh my God, this is great. This is so helpful. And I agree with it and I want to use it. But they might be hesitant because they still believe they're in the minority and they're not.
Yeah, well, you can send this to 100 people anonymously if you want to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Let them
that's
decide
the
on their
benefit
own.
of that. Everything's digital or it could be printed out. So it's useful in that way. And if everybody who's listening to this who doesn't like this would just find 3 people in one of their local schools to send a link to, it's just trying to chip away at the narrative. And it's also search engine result war. So we're really trying to get our website up so it comes up in search results. So when people Google LGBT schools, they will see our documents. This is a long game, and it is a cultural battle.
Right.
And most people are sheeply,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And if you study history, I think it's very apparent why you need to have quality leaders, and that quality good leaders are rare. And even the good leaders are have a mix of good and bad. And even Hitler was nice to dogs, right?
Yeah.
so it's not necessarily that black and white, but I think some leadership is clearly better than others, and a lot of leadership is straight up toxic and destructive. And people are going to follow the leaders. That's
Right.
it. People are herd animals. Most people are not going to stick their necks out. And I'm not dissing everybody who's not. I don't have children who I need to send to college
Right.
and buy food for them. And I'm going to be in dire straits if I lose my job. I'm in a situation where I'm not particularly cancelable. So I consider it like a culture bound duty to try to speak up against extremism, especially because I can. If you can't, you can always do it anonymously.
Right. Very true.
Register your protest. They can't take your mind.
Yeah, that's true.
And
Uh,
sure.
Now, what's interesting is, I mean, I find this interesting. Corporal Giroro says, "How long until an LGBS alliance?" As for being straight, I mean, I think some people, uh, what what I'm sensing is what I said to you before, that you have people now. We've come so far in terms of gay rights and so forth, that you have a lot of straight people, for lack of a better word, who are sort of like, "This is homophobic. Like, how do I help fight back and protect gays and lesbians?" Like, what can we help? And I think this helps because, remember, a lot of these kids may be pre-gay. In other words, a lot of the kids that may be, not stereotypically, masculine or stereotypically feminine, because they're relying on stereotypes to diagnose these kids or influence these kids, they may well grow up to be gay or bisexual or something like that. And that's totally fine. And I think most of us, even parents, unless you are very religious and against that for religious reasons, most of us will be like, okay, that's totally fine. But please don't lop body parts off and become, you
Yeah.
don't need to be the other. We're not in Iran.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. I don't want to cut you off. Sorry.
No, please go ahead. Cause that's, so there are people who may feel like, is this my territory? Am I encroaching? I want to jump in here and say something, but I don't know how to do it. I think sending your material out is great. But when people find themselves, let's just say, in a group of people talking about it, or with friends of theirs who are gay and feeling as you feel, like this is a mess, how do they join in that and get involved without somebody going, you don't belong here. What are you doing here?
You have to not care that somebody says that you don't belong here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm too verbose and my hair's on fire about this, so I tend to over explain and get overly upset with my friend groups. So I'm not a good person to advise on this because I'm a hothead
Right.
and I'm not good at controlling my emotions particularly.
Right.
And I'm just intense about everything. I have a great marriage and I don't have high conflicts with my friends and family. I get along with people well,
So you're
but I'm
just saying,
just
like, just tell the truth and say what you want to
intense.
say. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I am not the best person to ask advice on how to
Nor am
interpret
I. That's what
points
people come
out.
to me and they say this, and I'm like, why is that a problem for you? Like, it
Right.
doesn't occur to me to even think about that. But the reason I brought it up is that other people have said to me, like, well, I want to go help and this and that, but it says it's an LGBT group that
Right.
is
Well,
gathering to do stuff. And I'm like, so show up. But I'm
yeah,
not LGBT. And I'm like, who cares? Like, it
our
doesn't.
document is for everybody
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
Our document, we talk about girls, we talk about trans identified people who care about girls' rights. So this is not, we don't, I just want to make it clear this document is not just like this is hurting same sex attracted kids and our
Yeah,
rights movement. That's not what this document is. We do touch on that, and we wanted to make it clear this is a secular document. And it's not coming from religious conservatives that don't like really much of the gay rights progress or any of it. They
sure.
reject all of it. So it's very clear it's not coming from that place. But we talk about everyone: autistic kids, heterosexual male teenagers who are experiencing paraphilias, how this impacts religious people, how this impacts parental rights. And I really want to emphasize we definitely talk about parental rights. We have a link to a page that lists all the reasons why parents who are concerned about this are not abusive. That link in of itself might be useful to send to a teacher that's not completely ideologically deranged. So there's a lot in there for mainstream parents, and that's what the document is meant to address. But also in terms of pushing back against this, I want to make it clear that I care very much about young people who are persistently gender dysphoric. I do believe that the same-sex rights movement needs to completely separate from trans activism. It's compromised it too much, and there's too much radicalization and mental health problems in the trans population. We have enough mental health problems of our own, right? But the medicalization, all of it, we've seen just how extremist it's become as a movement, and the actual experience of having gender dysphoria has had an effect on how extremist that movement is, and we can't deny
Right.
that. But we need to speak up for the persistently gender dysphoric kids and the people who are so angry about this, and I'm one of them. We can't forget about that there are kids who experience persistent gender dysphoria, that they exist, and that we have to express love and compassion for them. And we have
Right.
to articulate arguments as to why, grounding them in reality and grounding them in knowledge that they must, that it's very critical for them to undergo a healthy puberty, and to do that with love and compassion
Right.
might be part of taking apart some of this.
Right. Right.
Because there are people need to understand, and this is in our documents as well, and on Gender Health Query, people need to understand there are reasons why, even if someone is very gender dysphoric, that there are legitimate reasons to prioritize their sexual development, their brain development, their bone development, and their personality developments.
Sure.
And you need a normal process of brain wiring and sex hormones to really fully realize yourself as an adult. We need to hold that up as a value,
Mhm.
and and not pretend, because we're so angry and it's easy to forget that those
Right.
children do exist. And
Right.
we need to show them cultural examples. I'd say Samoa, very gender nonconforming boys seem to do quite well there. We need to provide other examples and other ways of being, because they know they're different. They know they don't fit in. They know they stick out like a sore thumb. That causes anxiety. And you can't just kick that away and not
Right.
acknowledge the power of that. We just need to move forward on better ways. Some of our documents addresses some of that. We have examples of Fafa Fine playing on a male sports team, or having their own boxing league. Like Fafafini have their own boxing league. They're not in women's sports. So there are other, I don't think anybody should medicalize their body, but there are harm reduction ways that we can go about it. Nobody should sexually lobotomize themselves at age 12. So thank you for letting me say that. I'll be quiet.
That's good. Well, this came up as well, and you had already mentioned about kids with autism and so on. And Step Down says, is it coincidental that the autism epidemic overlaps with gender mania? And I think by epidemic, what this person is probably referring to is we recently found out that there were some published statistics. Don't know if I 100% trust them, but that 1 in 36 American children has been diagnosed with ASD. Now, I don't know if that's overdiagnosis. I don't know what's going on with that. But something you just said resonated with me. You said they know they're different and it causes anxiety. Now, there have always been, whether it's because they're autistic, ADD, or whatever, we didn't even know what to call it. And back in the day, the strange kid, the kids who just didn't seem to fit in. Maybe they were profoundly gifted, or maybe something was going on at home. They were traumatized and they knew they were a different experience. The difference is that I see is that we didn't have alternatives. There was nobody in the classroom or even in the counselor situation putting forward to them any kind of explanation for why they felt different. They just were teaching coping skills. So in other words, oh, you feel different. Let's help you cope with feeling different. Let's help you find a way to feel good about yourself or to be successful in some other way. It wasn't like, oh, this is why you feel this way because reasons. And what I see is now, and parents and others maybe took for granted that kids and other adults around their kids knew that endocrine system was important, knew that puberty was important, knew that bone development was tied to puberty, knew all these things that no, people don't know to this day. They don't walk around with this level of biological, scientific knowledge on a daily basis, least of all your kid's second grade teacher. So that's something you have to explicitly be taught. And then when you have this kid who's like, I'm confused and I'm anxious and I have all these problems. I don't like my body. I feel this, I feel that. And then maybe there's a boy who likes to play with dolls, whatever. Now somebody comes along and goes, reasons. And they think they're helping, giving someone reasons, things that they feel. The reason you feel this way is X. And in fact, giving a child the answer to why they have a negative emotion is on its face, in my opinion, as a parent. I'm a parent 3 times. And I remember in the early days of parenting, before any of this was a thing, that I learned somewhere from some book that it was bad practice to tell your child about their feelings. That you should, if you want to really understand your child and have them trust you and you have a close relationship, that you listen to their feelings, as you point out, ground them in reality so that their feelings are not like disconnected from things. If they're worried about something and they really don't need to be, you're safe, you're okay. I understand that you feel concerned, but let me tell you how you are safe, things like that. But you don't go, oh, you feel this way because, for the simple fact that you don't know. You can't possibly know why they feel a certain way. And that is projecting. Now you're projecting why you would feel that way or why you think they should feel that way onto them. You're not being helpful. You're actually being incredibly narcissistic and selfish. And now it's suddenly like, it's totally fine to tell children why they feel in certain ways. And I'm like, did we completely reverse the rules about projection and being dogmatic about stuff like that? Because that's what I'm seeing happening, is instead of just leaving well enough alone and go, that sounds frustrating, I'm sorry you feel that way. Well, I'm here if you want to talk, if it helps you feel better, but just know that you're safe, you're okay, I've got your back. Everything you're going through is normal. Lots of kids feel frustrated, but I know that doesn't necessarily help you. Things like that, where it's like, I hear you, but I'm not going to tell you why you feel this way.
I think you described iatrogenesis very well right there. On the Gender Health Query website, we have multiple topics, and also it's addressed in this particular document, schools document. There's been many social contagions in history, and on our website, we document quite a few of them. Eating disorders are socially contagious. Suicide risk is socially contagious. Depression in girlfriend groups is socially contagious. There's been very, very strange social contagions that have involved hysterias, fake illnesses, fainting, the dancing plague, the glass delusion. And so now in this cultural context, you are roping the types of people who are prone to getting sucked into those kinds of contagions into this particular dynamic. But that's one kind of kid. I want to go back to the other persistently, likely same-sex attracted, very non-conforming child who is clearly extremely masculine as a child or clearly extremely feminine and drawn to masculine things and very drawn to feminine things. I think we do have to acknowledge when people talk about a gender spectrum, what they're talking about, or when they talk about innate gender identity, that they have some valid points. And I think that heterosexual beauty standards, ideal beauty standards, and heterosexual mating standards and heterosexual norms are powerful both biologically and culturally. So I think we have to give space for the fact that the experience of really extremely gender nonconforming kids is a struggle for them. And it's not that hard to understand why they want to put themselves in the place of the opposite sex. So there's different kinds of kids getting sucked into this, and they're not all under the same umbrella. And I think we need to speak more about how we need to try to understand the persistently dysphoric child too, and not have that get lost in this, because it does wind up being callous. And it is easy to forget to do this in the outrage of all of this, because they're being harmed by this too. They're being lied to, they're being over medicalized. Even if they are going to medicalize, they're probably being medicalized more than they need to be. I don't want to say need. I don't think anyone needs to do this, because I'm against all medical transition. I think it's medically assisted self-harming behavior. But better a functional male who has breast implants that's still sexually functional than a sexually dead male that never even explored their romantic identity. So I just wanted to say that there are different kinds of kids getting involved in this, and we should care about all of them.
No, that's a really good point. And I think, most of us, if we're honest, will remember some child at some point in our lives who really, like you almost had to blink and say, like, that's a boy or, that's a girl, even at a very young age, because of either the way they looked or the way they carried themselves or the toys they wanted to play with and so on. It just so happens that I'm thinking of one in particular that I knew who grew up to be gay. And just was when you think of almost like the stereotypical gay man who's very, very effeminate and loves all the things like that you would ascribe to like femininity, let's say, even going so far as to call himself girl, that kind of thing. But I never picked up that he wanted to be a girl, right? So he just liked things that were stereotypically girly, if that makes sense, more than I did because I was a tomboy. So
Yeah.
I just remember this kid being like, "Can I play with your Barbies?" I'm like, "Have at it." Like, you can have
Well,
my
the
Barbie.
affirmative model advocates try to paint the difference between a pre-gay kid and a true trans girl as something that's really easy to determine and definable. So there are effeminate boys that might like dresses or that kind of thing, but
Right.
they're lying when they're saying that clinically significant gender dysphoria doesn't occur in pre-gay kids, and these are somehow two very different populations. So that's why so many LGBT human rights activists, which there are a lot more of us now, are so concerned about it. And the research bears that out. And there's one study in particular, saying it's the more recent one. I think it's maybe 2021 might be the date. I should know that, but I don't want to quote it wrong. But in her dissertation, she shows the answers to sort of these questions that were measuring the gender dysphoria of the kids. And the desisters also, a lot of them scored in the same ranges as the persisters. So there isn't always a difference between a trans kid and a gay adult. So those are one of the myths we're trying to debunk, and we do in this document.
I see.
Yeah.
So, Now, one of the other sources of confusion, I think, for adults is that there are adults who have transitioned as adults who are not part of this movement, or as I mentioned at the outset, were against it, against childhood transition, and they, all that. Um, but they aren't part of the movement, in that they don't seem to have the same uh I don't know what you want to call it, radical nature as some of the activists. And so I think people get confused and say, so how does one figure out if somebody is really trans, whatever that would be? And because what's happening also is that school counselors are saying to parents, even when we say it's important to go through puberty and it's important this, it's important that, even if you can find that rare counselor who will say, okay, we will support you, mom and dad, not allowing your child to have the medical transition. We'll back you up on that, but we want you to compromise and use their pronouns and go ahead and so allow them to socially transition. And parents are sitting there like, how do I know if my child is just persistently gender dysphoric, or, as you pointed out, going to grow up and be Buck Angel, Blair White, somebody who actually does want to go through with transition, and I guess, feels better because of it or something. There's a lot of confusion around that. Is there a way for that, or is it just you can't tell? There's no way to know, and it's going to be up to the
Well,
adult.
there was a recent study on gender nonconformity just released from the Netherlands, who interestingly are responsible for starting this medicalized protocol, that showed that young people's desire to be the opposite sex diminished over time, not just through puberty, but even into, early adulthood.
Interesting.
So there isn't an exact way to know for sure. Now, the
Mhm.
child is more insistent, that they are going to be more likely to be in a persister category.
Got it.
I see a lot of other cultural ramifications of lying to young people that you can just identify into a sex category that necessitates raising children to understand their biological reality.
Right.
So I think a lot of things are going on in the quote unquote queer community or LGBTQ plus spaces that are actually very sleazy and manipulative. And it revolves around this idea that you can say that you're trans and you can just identify into other people's sex classes. So what happens is lesbians get pressured to have sex from autogynephilic males, and autogynephilia is a paraphilia where you're sexually attracted to the idea of being a woman. So that's not a lesbian in a man's body. That's a heterosexual male psychosexual dynamic.
Right.
There are youth some who have transitioned younger and they pass well, where they're having sex with males without telling those males. They're going home with them. They're having sexual interactions with men, and they're not telling them that they are men. So
Wow.
I consider that rape by deception. I think there's a lot of sexual entitlement among trans identified young people. And this is so ideologically inconsistent and ridiculous that people believe they have the right to identify, young people, and they're being told this by their teachers, essentially. They can identify into something that they're not, completely damage their body so they can look like this category of person. And that's almost a holy sacrament.
Right.
To reject your own body, reject your own reality, and then have Medicaid pay for your body mods. That's a sacred right. But if you're a heterosexual that doesn't want sex with a feminized biological male, that somehow is some kind of anathema or bigotry. It's completely absurd to be a group of people or to have a movement, because it's not everybody, I don't want to say all of them, but quite a few trans identified young people, to believe that you're sexually and emotionally entitled to other people who are rejecting you because of your body,
Right.
and get mad about it when you have rejected your own body. It's
That's
ridiculous.
a great point. I never thought of that.
And this is the ideology that teachers are pushing in schools. And
Wow.
they have no right to come out and stand up and promote this narrative that trans girls are girls. This has ramifications in the real world. This has negative externalities in the real world. This has psychological impacts on gender dysphoric youth themselves and the mostly gay and lesbian and bisexual youth that have to be around them.
Right.
So you have to tell a kid that's growing up who doesn't like their body, you cannot change your sex.
Right.
Yes, you have to do that. That's the loving thing to do. That's the compassionate thing to do, because these youth gender scenes are narratives of histrionics. They're narratives of mental illness. They are cult-like dynamics, and this is not good for them either.
Right.
So, and
Well, this
I
is
think I
something
got
else.
someone out there with equipment, and it's not my own house, so I apologize.
No,
But
that's all right. I can't hear it. Step Down also mentions anecdotal evidence here, how a lot of girls in the early phases of puberty that develop an eating disorder and body dysmorphia are then guided towards the possibility of being a boy instead. I've heard about that happening. And here's another thing that I'm concerned about as a mother of girls. Not mine are older, so thankfully this is an issue anymore. But
right.
I was a teenage girl once, and I was very tomboyish, but here's something that I do think is new, and I don't know where it comes from, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on it. Um, I I wasn't excited about puberty. It certainly wasn't something I was like, "Yay!" I can't wait. But it was just one of those things, kind of like growing taller. Like I wasn't going to be small anymore. I was going to be taller than I was. My feet were going to get bigger and outgrow my favorite shoes. That were just like certain things that I don't remember, and I don't remember any of my friends, quite frankly, ever going, "Oh no, I have to go through puberty." Whereas now it seems like it's completely normal to freak out about getting your period, where it's like, isn't this 2024? I mean, I grew up in the 70s and it was like, "Oh, gonna get your period. Here's what you do." It was like not a big deal. When did it become such a gigantic deal that our bodies were going to change and it was going to be a little uncomfortable for a while and boys' voices were going to change and stuff was going to happen? It seems like it just suddenly became this crisis. And I think that's hard for parents too, is parents are like, I cannot relate. I cannot relate. This was an automatic process. Didn't think about it. Why are you guys freaking out?
Everything's a crisis for this generation. I'm sure, I don't know if you've talked about Abigail Schreier's recent book.
Yeah. Not yet on the show, but
Oh,
yeah.
okay, that would be a good thing to address, because Abigail Schreier, I believe the book is called Bad Therapy.
Bad therapy. Yeah.
And it's not
And I
just
have talked
therapy
about bad
itself, but we have
therapy,
a therapy culture. Schools have become therapy environments, and parents have become therapy parents. So it's more than just the therapy. That book addresses more than just the therapy situation, at least as far as I can tell from the interviews that she's given. And yes, you make things out to be a problem. People will see them as a problem more. Jonathan Haidt has done research on this matter. That's well established. So there's no reason why teachers who understand child development should not be able to grasp why some of these things are problems. I mean,
right?
I don't know if we definitely need more quality teachers and higher quality education, uh, for them to grasp these things that you're talking about, and why this isn't good for young people, why it's not a good environment to raise young people in.
Well, it seems to be that in general, the somewhere along the line, people got it in their heads that if we can anticipate every possible difficulty, bring it up in advance, and talk about it endlessly, it won't happen. And in fact, the opposite occurs. That, especially with children, they're very suggestible. And we know this. I mean, in neurolinguistic programming, we know they're actually using it now to sort of program these kids to have anxieties and have neuroses. But like they're doing the exact opposite of what you would do to reduce anxiety. You don't sit around in your feelings all day. You don't constantly talk about your problems. You don't, check in with your feelings and broadcast it to the world in a post-it note on the classroom wall if the goal is to reduce anxiety. All of these things elevate anxiety.
Yeah, I have an anxiety disorder. Legitimately, I really do.
Yeah.
And it runs in the family, and I control it very well. I'm a happy person, and I don't worry that I'm going to get cancer all the time or things like I used to, because I just have resolved most of it. And I'm definitely a big fan of Stoic philosophy. So so I definitely agree that this paradigm of excessive therapy culture is backfiring,
Yeah.
because you especially if you have an anxiety disorder, you like all the other parts of my brain are just firing as well as they possibly could. And
Right.
that's what keeps me happy, and that's what keeps me sane, and
Right.
that's what keeps me positive about life. And so with an anxious kid, you really need to try to maximize those other parts of the brain that can cope, the other parts of the brain that can calm down the negative rumination. That's what you need to emphasize. You have to emphasize the healthy parts. And if you're
Right.
an anxious kid, you need practice with that. And the younger that you start, the better. Which
That's
is why
true.
I'm so concerned about throwing validation and scalpels and Lupron and cross-sex hormones at growing young people. I just
Right.
think ultimately crashes are going to come for a lot of them, particularly because they're all being completely undergoing extreme body modification as growing young people. I'm very concerned about a lot of these young people, what's going to happen to them in 10 years, 15 years, 20
Yeah,
years.
it's I don't see it having a good outcome. And I really wonder where the adults who participated are going to be when everybody wakes up to the reality that this was this generation's, lobotomizing of people. Because I think that will happen. People will eventually snap out of it at some point, probably when we see what happens to these kids after, let's say, 15 to 20 years. And I don't predict anything good. And then the question is, will they be held accountable? And I just don't see it. We're getting so cynical because we don't see accountability. WPATH files came out and I was horrified. I mean, I couldn't digest it all at once. I had to take it in small bits and, I had to pause periodically, scream, I cried. There were a bunch of things that I just got so angry and upset because I realized that, looking at my own kids and struggles that they had in, teenage years, but as I say, there, but for the grace of God, go out, like had they been in public school at the time with these things going on, I don't even want to think what they would have said to my kids given what they were going through. And so I got really angry, but I thought to myself, it's got to turn around now, right? Right? I mean, this is horrific, right? People are going to start to wake up, right? And we are not even a month out from that, and it's like not getting any coverage. Nothing's happening. You've got Joe Biden, Easter Sunday is Trans Visibility Day, and I'm like, wait. I
You
know
had
we're
a whole
always
Italian culture that castrated boys to have pretty singing voices. You cannot depend on the masses.
I I mean,
The
I would have hoped we
there's
could have
no
depended
the
on at least the medical community to say, "Oh
yeah,
my god."
right. Yeah, no, we've definitely seen many medical scandals happen in the past. So people say, "Oh, this insanity has to break." I hope it does, but I'm skeptical of that in certain ways. So I think a lot of people realize that the satanic panic situation in the 80s and 90s really hurt a lot of people unnecessarily. There was a lot of therapists doing the recovered memory type of therapy that instigated a lot of false accusations of male relatives and things like that, of sexual abuse that didn't happen. And there's been articles and books written on that, and it did die down. I think this is different in the sense that now that the trans narrative has gained traction and some power, these individuals are extremely motivated to transition. It's a very aggressive, intense motivation. And they are going to continue to push and push and push and push and push. So their activism and their desires aren't going to die down in the same way that the satanic panic thing died down. Because there's not all these people out there that really, really, really want wrong accusations of sexual abuse. Like there are really toxic borderline personality disorder people that are very specifically like that. but kind of it doesn't have the same power to keep generating, even though it does. I mean, there's been Me Too and
Right.
that kind of thing does happen, but there is just such a strong compulsion to transition in these individuals, which is why I don't think you can stop it. That I don't know how well it's going to die down. And maybe lawsuits can stop some of it, but people are going to still push to do this, and they're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing for kids to keep being able to do this. And when the kids can't, they're going to provide them hormones on the black market. So it's a pretty aggressive drive that you're coming up against. But what I would say is people have very aggressive drives to do other things that aren't necessarily healthy, like steroid addiction. The guys who lift the weights and for their muscle mass gains, it's a very addictive dynamic that they're doing. And if you watch F to M transition videos, their whole vibe of them is very similar to guys who are addicted to steroids and working out. They have transformational narratives. They completely disregard the health consequences, and they are obsessed with their appearance. It's
Yep.
a hard thing to control. It's a hard thing to fight back against now that it's gained cultural
Right.
hold.
Well, and I keep coming back to incentives, but I can't seem to help it. The social media, even the business model of social media
Yes, money.
encourages all of this. So, it's not just that social media exists. It's that they write the algorithms to keep giving you what you've already indicated an interest in, which of course is, putting you in a situation where you're going down rabbit holes into something that you may have been curious about, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to marinate in it for the next hour. And they just keep shoving the stuff in your face more and more and more on the theory that, well, you wanted it. There must be something you're going to buy from this, and we're going to try to sell it to you. And then, of course, the advertisers come in and put my stuff in front of people who showed an interest in this. And it seems to me that at this point, parents are especially up against it because they want to protect their kids from this kind of messaging. But if they say, you can't have a smartphone, you can't go on social media at all, or we're going to put all these strict controls on it, you're ending up with the same problem of that prohibition always instigates, which is kids being sneakier, or kids using their school issued laptop or tablet to use the school VPN to go access stuff. So parents feel like they're counter parenting with these activists, with the teachers, with the counselors, with the whole gender education industrial complex. Even, because I hear this all the time. Well, why did the parents let them go on social media? I'm like, why are you assuming the parents do? I know parents who don't. And then the irony is the kids they're even more motivated to go dig it up. The people I notice have the best success with it are the ones who limit things, but they sit and talk to their kids every single day. They're very aware of what they're doing. They share with them certain messages. They explain puberty, why it's important. Like, they have these conversations from an alarmingly young age, but they don't have a choice about why it's important to grow up and all the stuff. And rather than prohibiting, because everything is aligned against parents, especially parents who prohibit. It just becomes
Wow.
the forbidden fruit.
That was really interesting. And yeah, I agree with everything that you said. And I don't have all the answers,
Right.
because young people's social environments have such power over them. And I completely rebelled when I was 12 or 13 years old. I don't think there was anything my parents could say. And there's reasons why people rebel at that age. There's biological reasons, evolutionary reasons for that, having to separate from the parents. But it creates a lot of dangers. It was probably dangerous when teenagers would wander off too far from the tribe and get eaten by lions.
Yeah.
And now they're going to drink and drive and get into a car accident, or they're going to get sucked into a horrible social contagion and damage their body. There's just dangers involved in adolescence,
Yeah.
which is why transitioning adolescence is just as dangerous as socially transitioning small children. Teenagers don't make better decisions than children do. They make worse decisions sometimes, even though they're coming into their maturity. I like the idea of what you said about treating your child like an intelligent being and debating, discussing with them, teach them to be skeptical of what they hear, teach them about logical fallacies, teach them about how we're all prone to being captured by our emotions and our ideologies. That's got to be something that's protective and limiting. I like that. I like keep the discourse open and limit. That
It
that
it
sounds
has
like the
it
best.
has to be.
Yeah, that just sounds like the best solution. And since we're not going to be discussing this all day, I would love to just talk about what can we do about this. And I tried to check out some of your episodes and listen a little bit, and I do listen to your YouTube channel. But what do you think is the answer? Is it more school choice? I know people who homeschooled their children, and their children got sucked into trans ideology in their homeschool circles. I I I don't have the answer. Do you?
There is
I'm not
I'll tell you what I tell everyone is there's no substitute for being a very, involved parent. And by that, I don't mean a hover parent. I don't mean, like wrap your kids in bubble wrap and cut them off from the outside world. What I'm talking about is what I said, where at each age, where it's sort of age appropriate. And if you're confused about what might be age appropriate, I would encourage you to look into like Erikson stages. I think that's a pretty good place to start. That's a little more than Piaget, but there you'll understand what's happening with the child's morality or their primary question at each age or each, sort of developmental stage. And so like in elementary school, their primary goal is to figure out how to be good. And so if you can kind of learn about that, and then in their middle school ages and high school, it's more like, who am I and where do I fit in? So if you operate as a parent with, this is what my child's sort of prime directive is, right? Is they're trying to figure out how to be good when they're up until like, fifth or sixth grade. Now they're trying to figure out, where do I fit in and what kind of friends do I want to have? What kind of person do I want to be? And if you can engage in a dialogue with your child at that level, in other words, don't come at them about identity issues when they're in elementary school. They're too young for that. But you can come at them with the like, what do you think is why do you like this? But what do you think it makes this good or bad or wrong? Or, to have conversations about scenarios that they, sharing, for example, what do you think about sharing your toys, and talk about where they stand on these things and share what you think about good and bad and so forth and so on, with the goal, I think, of reinforcing their right to boundaries. The number one thing to get across to kids before they go to the who am I identity piece of middle school and above is you're an individual, a sovereign individual. Your physical, emotional, and cognitive boundaries belong to you. You define them, you safeguard them. You have every right to do that. Nature endowed you with certain instincts to protect you. Like something seems fishy, listen to that, ask questions. So if you can get your young child to be very cognizant of how much they own their body and they own their thoughts, you're inoculating them against a lot of really bad ideas, because at least they will be, they'll have an ownership sense of self, and it's not going to be defined yet. So if somebody comes along when they head off to, now I get to define myself, they're already going to be like, I do, me. My pronouns are I and me, right? Not, like I have no sense of I should give to others. I should. If you're doing a lot of should on your kid, a lot of duty culture, a lot of other people care what other people think, you're setting them up to be plucked by whoever wants to define them when they get to middle school. If instead you talk more about boundaries, why they exist, why they're important, where they end and someone else begins, that is going to go a long way. And so that's what I recommend to people, is have these conversations, read books. There are great, great books. And I know it's somewhat right leaning, but the Book of Virtues is actually a great book to use with younger children, because there are stories, poems, essays, all kinds of things you can read with your kids that do not heavy-handed it. It's not like the Bible, right? Necessarily. You don't have to be religious, but they give a child a sense of grounding in core virtues that help them define those boundaries. Because what school's trying to do, what these teachers are doing, is they're assaulting those boundaries, either pretending they don't exist or trying to battering ram them. And if your child has very strong, like, no, that is going to go a long, long way. Because if nothing else, they'll come home, like my kids did this. And I'm not saying I'm a perfect parent, but I must have done something right, because they would come home and they'd say, Mom, My teacher told me today that I should see the kids in the book that I'm reading as members of a group and not individuals. Didn't you always tell me that we should look at other people as individuals? Why are they saying that to me? And we'd have a conversation. But at least they came home and told me that the school was telling them something different than what I told them. Now we can talk about it. I can shore up the wall, right? I can be like, oh, well, some people might think that, but here's why I disagree. Here's why I don't think that's safe for you. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, I agree with you, Mom. Okay.
Yeah,
And then
back and forth. Role model and emulate thinking.
that's right. Right.
Yes.
You've got to model the thinking process at their level and then keep those lines of communication open. And always I would send them back like, hey, if you ever hear anything that confuses you or that doesn't align with what we've talked about, let's talk about it. Just come and talk to me. Every time they'd get in the car after school, I'd say like, what did you learn today? Not how was your day? That's like fine, not fine, good, bad, blah, blah, blah. But what did you learn today? What surprised you today? Did you hear anything that was, unusual today? So I asked different kinds of questions and not a yes or a no or easy answer. They didn't always answer, but they got in the habit of hearing it. So then when they did have something to say, they'd pipe up and volunteer it. And again, I'm not perfect. I don't mean to sit there and go, oh, I did this perfect job. There were plenty of situations where I had to come in and be like, whoa, but you have to start somewhere. And I think that's the place to start. And then, as I said, as they get to be, 11, 12, 13, puberty's beginning, it's natural. They want to pull away from you. They have to in order to launch someday. So it's really, they want you, they don't want you. They want you, they don't want you. And you have to nurture that and just make sure they know they can come back. They can always come back. You're not going anywhere, but you understand they're trying to differentiate. Just keep them grounded in reality. Keep teaching them to gut check that their feelings align with facts because they won't necessarily know. Well, I feel this. Okay. But let's take a look at what we know. So what do you know about the situation? Well, I know this. Does it make sense that you would feel this if you know this? And sometimes you can catch them.
What do we do about the Lysenkoization of our entire educational system, though?
Yeah, we can't do anything to it. All we can do is either leave, which obviously is my recommendation, like, walk away is your safest bet. You're still, as you point out, even in the homeschooling community, you got to keep your antenna up. You need to still choose your community and choose your friends carefully because it's everywhere. But the education industrial complex, both private and public, is captured by these ideas, with the exception of very religious schools that have rejected it, but they have other things you may or may not want. So there's not really much we can do except ruthlessly tell the truth at every turn. I'm just one of those who thinks you get your kid out of harm's way first and then you go at it. I don't necessarily, obviously I don't, my kids aren't in public school and I'm still talking about it constantly, but you don't stop because that's going to be your future politicians, leaders, policemen, doctors, all the people. So we all have skin in the game of how people are being educated, but so we can't just abandon it. We have to keep our ear to the ground. We have to keep fighting. It's also our tax dollars. But I think if you're a parent, you do have to get your child to safety before waging the war. But if they're still in there and you want to fight, I would recommend doing it with subversion rather than aggression, meaning, there will be retribution. If you, for example, show up at the school board meeting, what I tell people is you've got a kid in the school and you show up and you read the porn, that's going to come back on your kid in every possible negative way. Yes. I don't recommend it. So I would prefer you take Justine's website and surreptitiously send it to every single school board member, every single other parent that who's not completely already lost in the district. Get mailing lists, print it out and leave it in their mailbox if you have to, with just like the summary page.
And that's one of the purposes of it.
Yes, subversion. That's what I recommend, is be subversive as much as you can. Have meetings, have little clandestine in-person meetings, invite people over for coffee, 3, 4 at a time, 5 at a time, and brainstorm and strategize. Everybody's district is going to be different. Even your private school, everybody's situation is going to be different. But if you can build community within that experience and find new ways to be subversive about it, about how you fight back, I would recommend that versus the show up in front of the cameras that will be recorded for all time and read porn in front of people.
Yeah, you'll pay for that in
Oh yeah,
some
you will.
You have
Yeah,
to be ready for that if that's
exactly.
what you want to do. And some people, that's their nature. So they're meant for that. And it does serve its purpose as well.
Yeah, exactly. I
Do
don't know
you
if I
think if
answered
we
your
can
question,
regain
but
Yeah, no, I wanted to hear what you had to say too.
yeah,
So I appreciate
yeah.
that
No,
because
thank you.
I'm not a parent also. I'm just concerned for all of our society's young people and our society generally and the young people in my family, my extended
Right.
family. Do you
Yeah.
think if we could regain the school system, let's just say that more moderate forces regain the educational system, do you think it would help our society just generally if every person by the time they went through high school had really good systematic education in totalitarianism?
100%.
Like if
Yeah.
they really understood what totalitarianism is, how
Yeah.
it works, how entire societies get captured by that. Like, could we shift our culture to be more sane? And then also give them the self-awareness that even once you understand rationality, that you can use it just to prop up your garbage more easily. Like I just watched a really interesting one of those after school YouTube channel. It was just really interesting about how higher IQ people are better at rationalizing
Right.
their sometimes crazy worldviews. So they also need, like, could we guard against this
Yeah,
through
you can't
it's
just
just
use
I almost feel like this is more obviously reading and writing is important, but I almost feel like we can talk about history. What happened in Egypt. I had to remember the names of all the pharaohs, and I can't remember them. But I think if we teach more the arc of history,
sure.
or maybe arc is not the right word, but these historical trends and what things went right and what things went wrong as a more general concept, rather than forcing children to memorize Egyptian king names, would that help?
I think what helps is kind of as I said before, we have to decide, and we used to, I thought at some point in history, no, when I say at some point in history, like Western civilization, that there are virtues and the virtues are for a reason. Virtues contribute to human thriving, shall we say, and happiness on an individual level as well as societally. And that a combination of learning those with a appreciation for and respect for human nature. There's the fact that there's only so far we've evolved. We can't get away from our biology. We can't get away from certain imperatives that we don't have control over. And it is just kind of part of our nature to a certain degree to aggress against each other when we don't have other means of resolving disputes. So I think reason takes care of some of it, but not all of it. The problem, as you point out, is that you can use reason to rationalize really bad behavior and things that aggress against others or that are not virtuous behavior. So we have to have a combination. Even the founders of this country said that, we had to be able to think rationally, but also be moral. And they weren't necessarily referring to religion, although most of them were at least deists. They were referring to the idea that, you have a grounding and a core set of shared virtues and values. And I think whether those are, thrift, honesty, what are some of the other ones? Perseverance, like certain kinds of courage, intellectual honesty, personal courage, moral courage. We don't have that. I watched with horror, for example, when Bill Clinton was sort of allowed to lie, and a lot of people poo-pooed it, like, what's the big deal? And I remember thinking right then and there, even though we were pretty far down the path of making it okay to lie, I remember thinking, this is going to reverberate. There are young people watching and listening, and this is the president of the United States, and all the people who are so eager to make excuses for his lies, that the message that will be sent, people have always lied, but we at least sent a message that it's not okay. We reject that. And so we don't do that anymore. We teach conversely that, there's almost no such thing as lying. We teach perspective rather than principle. Your truth, my truth. And that's where reason has gone off the rails. So I think philosophy can be taught at a young age. simply, remember we talked about the boundaries. So we can teach the non-aggression principle, for example, as a core thing at very young ages. We can teach grounding in reality at very young ages. We can have conversations about ways that are good and bad of resolving disputes. And we can talk about the importance of telling the truth versus lying, because rationalization is a kind of a lie. You have to depart from, reason will take you a certain distance, and then you have to leave logic by the wayside to have a real rationalization. So if we can ground, like you said, logical fallacies, teach them about logic, teach them about making good arguments. What is a good argument? What's a fallacious argument? The other thing is language. We've abandoned language. We've like Orwell said, if you have the words mean whatever the people in power want them to mean at any given moment, then people stop knowing what anyone's saying. And they stop being able to formulate their own ideas because they don't know what they think, because they don't have words to think their thoughts with. So we're pretty far down that path right now. And that's what scares me the most. I'm kind of a word nerd, and I get really hung up on definitions of words. I think we need to reclaim certain words. We need to reclaim liberal. We need to reclaim, not just abandon them. We need to reclaim them and use them intentionally in the way they were originally, what they really mean, and stop letting people redefine the language, call them out at every turn, and teach our children that words have meaning. But we can't do that if they're not reading, if they don't read books, if everything is electronic, if they don't see us reading books, if they don't see us caring about the words we say. So adults have a lot to atone for, in my opinion. It's not just the teachers, it's all of us. We all have work to do in terms of, what children in the society are seeing us do and celebrate and champion. And we need to start championing the things we want to see more of, and denigrate the things we don't want to see. This validation of aberrant behavior needs to stop. Not just validation, but celebration. You'll see people who are morbidly obese. Now, I don't want to, people say, oh, you shouldn't judge them. I'm like, why though? Unless I know for a fact they have some glandular disorder, that is not healthy to be 400, 500 pounds. That's not healthy. But we're walking around going, don't say that. We need to stop doing things like that. That's a form of lying that needs to stop. Not just that, but all kinds of things that we make okay.
I would argue that if you're on some kind of interview talking about how elated you are because you amputated your own breasts and are calling yourself a they them, I think we need to say that, and I'm using that as an example because it was somebody who's a non-binary identified person that was working at the Mary Bridge Hospital here in my city. And there's a recent whistleblower that was printed in the, I believe the Free Press reported on that. And I went back and was trying to find some of the people who work there. And one of them is a they, them, not on a testosterone, but with a double mastectomy, who done a few podcasts about being non-binary and how life-saving it is, and spreading medical misinformation and spreading mental health misinformation to the people on these podcasts, who was just talking about how wonderful it was to be non-binary and rocking the body that you want to. And I'm like, why? I think we should say it's actually disturbing that you're really happy that you cut your breasts off and have to have people call you a they that. Why are you not happy because you took up rock climbing and that's exhilarating? So I
stop platforming that though. Somebody put that person on a podcast. And if you're going to have people like that on your podcast, then you have to be prepared to ask tough questions. And if they won't answer the tough questions, don't platform them. It's this notion that everybody deserves to be heard, that we have to listen to all ideas, no, we don't have to. People have freedom to speak all ideas, but no, we're under no obligation to hear them. We're under no obligation to platform them. And that's something that I really would like to stand up for more, is freedom of speech goes both ways. I don't have to listen to you. I don't have to platform you, and I don't have to celebrate you. Go over there and do your thing. I'm not going to get in your way, but I'm not going to participate. And we're so afraid to say no to anyone anymore. And that has to stop. Our kids are watching.
Yeah, and it's predatory in school. I would consider it predatory.
Yes.
when somebody that is emotionally dysregulated and hates their body goes and thinks it's just glorious that they've done this, to go in and market that to children for their own sense of validation is it. I understand everybody wants to feel like they're helping kids that are like they are. Everybody wants to do that, but there are value judgments that we need to make when it comes to children.
Well, the other thing I would argue, and I get a lot of heat for this, but I'm just going to say it, is I genuinely believe that people who are very, very upfront with, let's say, their identity markers, okay, where that becomes a thing. Like, I could say this about people who are into CrossFit or vegan. You know what I mean? Like the people who, they walk in a room and you know 5 seconds before they list off their identities. I genuinely believe that should be a disqualifier for teaching children. I think that right there should be a disqualifier. And if people say, "Oh, that's horrible. That means you're going to rule out all kinds of, people." And I'm like, no, there are plenty of people who are gay and teachers, there are plenty of people who are Black and teachers, there are plenty of people who are, even vegan and teachers. They just don't go, "I'm a vegan, bisexual, blah, 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 blah." Like everyone needs to, they don't wear it all over them like it's a flag. And there is a difference. If you need to be that exhibitionist about these things about yourself that ought not matter to anyone but you and possibly like your romantic partner and your friends, it certainly shouldn't matter to the 8-year-old in your 3rd grade class, then you probably shouldn't be around children, because what that tells me about you is you're about you. You're mostly about yourself. And I don't think anyone, even a straight person who's going to walk in, like I said, and be like, "Well, I'm a vegan." Like, okay, maybe you should just like keep that to yourself. We've gone off the rails about who's appropriate to teach. I know we have a teaching shortage, but these are the people who are quite literally raising the next generation. They're spending 8 hours a day with our children. They should be the most sane. They should be the most well-adjusted people, not people who have all kinds of issues. And yes, I think it should be a disqualifier. So people are just horrified when I say that, but I will say it. The other thing, and parents need to be very careful about that. Don't feel like, "Oh, I'm so judgy." Yes, these people are taking care of your kids. If you wouldn't leave them at home while you go out for dinner as the babysitter, why would you have them teach them all day? So it should be standard operating procedure to want your kid out of a class with somebody who has very obvious mental health issues.
Just real quick, we do address that in our guide. There's a couple paragraphs on recognize ulterior motives,
Right.
And say no.
It
I
absolutely.
would like to question this. People need to feel more comfortable judging. They do. It's necessary when you're starting to involve children into your own psychodramas. Like it's really, really, I'm into personal freedom. If people want to access plastic surgery on the open market, there's a lot of people that do that. I think general surgeries are clearly medical malpractice, but going in and marketing this stuff to young children is completely inappropriate in schools. It's going to require more value judgments. It really is. And we have failed at that in gay rights activist circles epically, and allowed some of the most disordered and manipulative people to take over things that took decades to build on pretty reasonable principles. But I sort of cut in there. I just wanted to say yes.
No, I appreciate
people think that. Our document encourages you to believe that. So
I thank you
for
for that.
Lynn's Ammer, who does the queer kid stuff. Like that's creepy.
It's
if you
so
feel
creepy.
creeped out by that, you should be. And and because I have an insider's perspective, I can walk people that are not well informed through why it's creepy, but they have to be shown because it's not obvious to them.
Right. Well, and honestly, I reject the notion of kids like me. First of all, you don't know. I mean, I wouldn't do that to my own child. Okay. And this is something I want more parents to think about. Think about your own children. Would you consider it appropriate to even if your child looks exactly like you and, has a similar interest in or hobby or whatever, would you go right at your child and say, "Oh, you're just like me. Let me tell you all about my childhood confusion and all of my issues and my this and my that"? Would you do it to your own kid? I certainly hope not, because that would make you what's called an emotionally immature parent. You shouldn't do that. That's really bad. You are not your kid. And no matter how much they look like you, sound like you, ape your mannerisms, all the things, and share your hobbies, they are them and you are you, and you're living in a completely different time period. And for you to sit there and judge by especially one little trait, which the teacher is going to be picking on something really superficial, and go, kids like me, I want to help kids like me. I reject that out of hand. This representation nonsense of, kids want to see teachers who are like them. Parents need to call that. There is no way for an administrator, a teacher, any stranger, or you, the parent, to decide who's like your kid in any meaningful way. You cannot, you should not, and that's not the role of the people teaching in your school, least of all when they're state employees. That idea needs to go back to with the dinosaurs. And I don't know how else to put it, but we've got to stop this whole kids like me, whatever bullshit. There's no such thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of the teachers that are doing that, a lot of times they're just like, they're not even necessarily a lesbian, or, some of those people they are doing that and they're culpable. I'm not letting them off the hook, but there's just seems to be so many of a certain personality type of a far leftist white teacher.
Yep.
That really gloms onto this as their cause. And it just feels very much like a toxic self-help cult vibe. So yeah, you have the people with their own psychodramas going on, and then you have the helpers, and sometimes they're genuinely nice people, and other times they have messiah complexes, right? It's a combination, and they're just like people in something that was like est, or maybe even Nexium or something. It sounds so good, and it's inclusive, and it's loving. And I use this example a lot, but you can just see the person in a hotel lobby, like a convention center, with their PowerPoint presentation and like their little pointer, talking about how they're going to save the world with gender diversity.
It's so
and you peel back the layers. There's so many things that operate like that. And that's why organizations like Gays Against Groomers use the term grooming. And a lot of people don't like it. I just got in this Twitter argument with some actually pretty moderate LGBT people that run a magazine called Queer Majority, and they're moderates and they're intellectual people, and most of them don't like the craziness, but they didn't like the term groomer. A couple of them really didn't like it.
It's accurate though.
There are reasons why they said, anyway, that's another story. But
the problem is very much like groomer and they think sex. Yeah. And they have to understand that there's ideological grooming too. And actually the majority of grooming that's going on in schools is ideological grooming.
Well, it's medical transition grooming.
Yeah, but whatever, that's still ultimately it's ideological.
Yeah, medical transition grooming is as disturbing as sexual abuse. Yes. Considering we know how much they've damaged the bodies of these puberty blocked young people that in ways that are permanent.
Well, we also know that a lot of kids who are gender dysphoric, not all certainly, but a fair number, are responding to trauma. That we may well be covering up and missing actual sexual abuse by jumping straight to gender conversations and the idea of transition, when in fact the kid might be recoiling and reeling from an actual sexual situation. Everything from walking in a mom and dad having sex and freaking out, because that can traumatize a certain very sensitive child, to being touched and being molested or being raped. And there's a range of things in between, seeing porn when they shouldn't see it, all kinds of things. And when a kid starts getting very interested in all these issues or rejecting their body, this usually is some kind of a warning flag, unless, to your point, they're one of those rare kids who is legitimately very, very gender dysphoric. But for the number that we're seeing, I think it's reflecting more traumas. And my number one suspicion is too much exposure to porn. Because we know what that does to adults. I can only imagine what it does to kids.
Yeah, I haven't delved into the porn influence, but I see a lot of people talk about it a lot, particularly because I follow a lot of radical feminists, which I'm not, but who do not like the trans movement. So I do see that. I haven't delved into research on that. I just know that when you're in between the ages of like 12 and 15 in particular, and you're just going into puberty, that is a very serious time. And it's a time that I personally experienced gender dysphoria. And kids are very sensitive and they can be warped in really weird ways that you might not think about. So my parents were children of the 60s. They're very open-minded. They had all of these sex positive books around. And, you know, I hit puberty. I was very curious about all of that. So I got into all those books and I was like reading them. And, you know, one of them was quite graphic about, and is it okay to talk about this? I don't want to be inappropriate.
No, it's okay.
But I just want to talk about, I just want to make a point. And this one particular graphic book didn't upset me that much, even though there was a lot of weird stuff in there. What seriously negatively impacted me was reading something that was more neutral about Freud, Sigmund Freud, and Sigmund Freud talking about penis envy. Okay, so I'd always been a tomboy. And my mom was really into art and I loved Renaissance art. And I was really interested in Bible stories when I was younger. I became an atheist at about age 12, but I was fascinated by Bible stories and religious. I loved all the power dynamics. I was just fascinated by men's bodies and the beauty of their power and Renaissance art and Greek art. And like, I was a tomboy. I was drawn to that. And then all I had to do was read, and I grew up on Free to Be You and Me.
Yeah, same.
I never felt inferior for being a girl. There was not one thing in my household that made me feel inferior for being a girl. Not a single thing. Very progressive, supportive parents. Free to Be You and Me, records that I was listening to, books that were positive. I read about penis envy. It spiraled me down into gender dysphoria. Like there was no reason for me to have a female inferiority complex. And I became very depressed about being a girl for about 2 or 3 years.
That's
Like
wild.
every time I heard about boys or anything about sexuality, all of the sudden, like that incredible waves of depression. I'm like, well, if penis envy is a thing, there must be a reason to be envious of boys. Maybe sex is better for them. Maybe they're better. Maybe everything's better for them. It caused me serious depression and gender dysphoria, just reading that one thing. So when people hand wave away this sexualized material in schools, they shouldn't do that because I came from a very progressive environment and there was one thing that just like spiraled me down and there was no reason for it. I was obviously curious about sex. I was a tween. I was interested in it. I had a healthy libido. I had a healthy body. I had progressive parents. There was no reason for me to have a female inferiority complex.
Right.
But I did. I got one just from
that just goes to show, Justine, that, you know, adults should humble themselves. You don't know what is going to be a thing that a child will react to or be traumatized by. You can't know. And you know, you might be slightly more sensitive to it if you had, like in your situation, you might be more sensitive to what could possibly affect a child because you had that experience. But even that, you would, you know, you might think that might traumatize another kid and it might not be bothered by, but they might be bothered by something that didn't bother you, like the statues. Who knows? Right. So the point is, there's no good reason, in my opinion, for elementary school teachers in particular, but I'd take it all the way through middle school, to be having conversations with or talking to children about the children's sexuality or anything or about their own sexuality with the children. In other words, if you need to do sex ed in middle school to keep them safe from getting pregnant, and it's like it was with us, it was pretended like this is the body, this is how pregnancy happens. Don't do these things because you could get pregnant. Here are condoms. This is whatever. Ask your parents or go to the doctor. It was like very clinical. It was like, here it is. No discussion of pleasure. No discussion of anything related to other than you probably shouldn't do it because you're not old enough, but here's how to not get pregnant. Here's how to not get a disease. And even that, I'll be honest with you, I remember as a kid going, you know, like being like, oh God, you know? So there's no good reason to add any further conversation to that in a school setting. None. And yet they're justifying the most disgusting levels of conversation. I read today, they're discussing bestiality with children in Australia. Not yet in the United States.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But they're discussing it there. They're discussing things that are the mere conversation is going to leave kids traumatized.
Yeah. So I think like I'm a very yeah, I guess you would describe sex positive person. I'm very interested in it. That's why I got sucked into what was going on with LGBTQ identity politics, because I just wanted a website to talk about lesbian relationships, sexual themes. Like, I wanted to get into all of that. I'm extremely open-minded, but I think the example that I just gave is reinforced of my own personal being a tween. It is just a good example of why all really specific sexualized language, even sex posy language in schools, is not appropriate. It should be more clinical. It probably should stick more with that. Or you might want to say a passing thing like your enjoyment is important and your comfort is important. Like maybe something really super basic, but you just don't know. It's such a vulnerable age.
Right.
And you just don't know how something is going to affect somebody. I think it's pretty reasonable. People don't want parents of, their kids seeing books about blowjobs in elementary school or really even junior high school. So you can come at it with the opposite of prude attitude and still have the same concerns as very conservative parents do.
That's right. That's right. This isn't really a political issue, and they're making it political. There are plenty of parents who would never call themselves conservative who are appalled at what's going on. And again, I'll go back to, the would you do it in your own home? Most parents kind of dread, we know we have to do it, but we don't look forward to the conversation. Let's put it that way. It's just one of those things that, as a parent, you're going to have the birds and bees conversation at some point. Generally what I tell parents is, when they ask, and only as much as they ask. So I remember my little brother was probably like 4 or 5, where do babies come from? Mommies and daddies. Okay. And then the next one's like, but how does that work? Well, dad plants a seed. Okay. Couple more weeks. How does he do that? Right. So, they just like, as they ask, you keep adding more information, not all at once. And I still remember the day that he asked so many questions that they finally had to give him like the general lowdown. And I watched him come out of my parents' room and his face was like, oh my God, what did they just tell me? And, but what were they going to say? We're not going to tell you. So parents don't relish this conversation. Why are strange adults so eager to have it with our kids? That's what I like. They're like, well, I need to be able to discuss this with your children. I'm like, you need to really not be teaching is what you need to not be doing.
They need to realize that there should be limits to their sex positivity.
Yeah.
Sex positivity is a good thing, but there are limits to it, and there's too many opportunities for blurred boundaries in public school settings that are already settings where exploitation of minors does happen, sexual relationships with teachers does happen. It's just not appropriate. School is not the appropriate place for it. I support the right of people to be polyamorous, but if I had kids, I would not particularly want that being marketed to them while they're teenagers, because I just don't, I don't care for it. I don't think it's the ideal, and other people can do it and it's fine. We also live in a pluralistic society where people have different attitudes about these things.
Well, that's the thing that kills me.
I don't like certain fundamentalist religions. Like there's just we have to live together without killing each other. It's really worth it. It is worth it and a worthy goal for us to all live together without killing each other.
Right. And the same people who will tell you how it's so important to be culturally competent and culturally relevant and all the things about different cultures and multicultural. And then they'll turn around and say, no, everyone needs to be as sex positive as I am. It's like, that's a very specific cultural attitude that is not shared by some of the very same people that you're busy wanting to protect and to describe as marginalized and all these things. They don't share your view. And maybe you should respect the fact that culturally they would like you to leave their kids alone. Like this idea that, because somebody thinks something, it's a de facto good for everyone and everyone's child is not true. And even within families, as you pointed out, progressive parents could have a kid who's simply not ready.
Yeah.
The parents might even agree with you about your viewpoint on something, but that doesn't mean they've elected you to do the talking for them. It also doesn't mean that you know their child better than they do. That should be left to the parents, and that's that. And I don't even understand why this is controversial. The biggest shock for me is to wake up and realize that letting parents parent their own children is now a political position. That shocked me.
That's absurd. And we do address that in the parental rights issues and provide really examples of really inappropriate things going on in schools and touch on the law in Washington state where a 13-year-old can run away from home and ask for medicalization and then have the parents' insurance policy pay for it and stay in a safe home, quote unquote, that has almost no government oversight. So
yeah, that's scary. That could go trafficking. That could trafficking vibes.
Yeah, I think I said this on Stephanie Wynn's podcast. I'll say it again. If you're gay or lesbian and you're listening to this, you should not. We all have friends who were treated terribly by their parents, usually religious parents. We have been rejected. When I came out, the narrative was it was nothing like it is now, which is very cult-like. Cut off ties to your parents. That's how gender scenes are. Everybody hates you. You know, for us in the support groups that I went to and the circles back then among gay and lesbian people, it was always like, your parents might come around, give them time, that you might find a partner and they might meet your partner and they might like your partner. And, there's opportunity for healing like that. That's what the messaging was. And then people tried to take care of kids that were homeless. Right. And the centers that I went to, they were responsible adults trying to actually caretake young people. I'm not saying there weren't sleazy things going on with gay youth and homeless youth, because I'm sure that there are. But what's going on now is definitely like the medicalization makes it very consequential, and it is very adversarial and cult-like and demonizing of parents for legitimate concerns. And so if you're gay or lesbian, you should not think that these online queer environments or even support groups in urban centers are going to be some kind of better, more supportive glitter family than parents. So that is not a conclusion you should jump to. But I don't know. Can we talk oh, sorry, just one more thing I wanted to say, maybe, and because it's probably coming to an end, but can we create parallel institutions where maybe we do have a better teaching of history, a better understanding of authoritarianism, a better understanding of human nature in schools, and find ways to fund it that are not exorbitantly expensive? Because I feel like maybe the public school system is a lost cause. I don't know. With all the internet and all this ability to network and share information, beyond homeschooling, which is obviously an option, are there any other private schools that we can create that are cheaper to run, that are better, or anything else, just to end on a positive note about positive?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, micro schools. So in other words, and I actually like the model of micro schooling from the standpoint that I think giant buildings full of children tend to not work out so very well for a host of other reasons. But the sort of, one room schoolhouse kind of concept, I think works really well, even with multi-age, because the real world is multi-age. So I think if you have a child who's comfortable in that kind of an environment, having a micro school where you pull the best of curriculum and you don't provide free lunch, transportation, all the things. There's, you don't have sports teams. You don't keep that separate. I think if we had recreational sports teams that you could join, like a town league or whatever, to do your sports or go to your gymnastics studio or whatever, so that school is just school. It's just, we're going to go to the school and we're going to do the thing at the school, or maybe school is part-time. It really doesn't need to be 8 hours a day. And the rest is like the kids read, they play, they build things, whatever. There are programs. I interviewed someone the other day, Michael Strong, who has the Socratic experience. It's an online school, but that's kind of how it works, where the kids have things that they do online, not all day, and then they have things they do offline, and they have a mentor and they have people that they talk to, but their community, their local community, their parents have to build. The biggest challenge for parents right now with alternative schooling is figuring out how to build community for themselves and their children outside of the one provided by the government. It used to be like, I have kids, I live in a neighborhood, we go to the school, and that's where I'm going to make all my friends. That's where everybody's going to be, whereas back in the day, it was like, you might go to church, or you might join the 4-H, or you might do something else. I encourage parents to first of all, start working on building community for yourself as an adult. Put on your own oxygen mask, because you're going to be modeling it for your children. They don't know how to make friends without watching you. So try to come out of your shell a little bit. You don't need 10 friends. You just need 2 or 3 people that you can talk to and, do something with. Build a little community, then come up with some way to have, get your kids educated. You can do a micro school. You can just make yourselves a little co-op or a pod. There are also classical schools. Now, there are those children, and I happen to have one of them, who like structure. Now we're homeschooling, but I'm trying to give her like some really clear boundaries around things because she likes that. So for those kind of kids who want a curriculum where it's like at 8 a.m. I'm doing this, at 9 a.m., then classical school is a great model. You read great books, you do writing, you learn all the classical stuff, and there are classical private schools. I don't love the ones that are coming up under like school choice, because it's still government run ultimately, even the charters. So they're going to end up having to do all the government things. Title IX, they're going to have all the trans stuff, the gender stuff, because they're still going to be getting money from the government. So if you want it to be truly parallel and alternative, it cannot take any kind of taxpayer funds or government funds, because the strings, if they're not attached day 1, it'll be day 10, day 50, day 100. They will come, and you're going to wake up and realize like you moved all these things around and you ended up in the same place. But yes, we can do these things. I'm trying to help people through this platform and my Discord community to like match up with what's best for their kids. Every kid's a little different. There's no one size fits all. But yes, there's a lot parents can do. And I keep trying to encourage parents to remember that just because public school or even private school today is the full 8-hour day, 5 days a week, with all these classes and all the stuff, it doesn't mean that's what you have to make it look like. Education doesn't have to look like that. And we, as Justine pointed out, you can take that time to teach logic and philosophy, or home ec and shop if you prefer, or how to fix a car if that's what floats your kid's boat, or going hiking in the mountains if that gets them out in the sunshine.
Or compounding interest, which is what my spouse, who's an auntie, has done for her.
Exactly. Kids need to learn
you
this
already have little investment accounts at age 18. So
that's fantastic. So that you can decide what it should be. And I really wish parents would seize that power back on behalf of themselves and their children. There's so much that can be done. You don't need to wait for Superman or wait for the government to give you a solution. That's not going to happen. And we have to remember that the government gave us what we've got. Like all this gender stuff is sanctioned from the highest office in the land.
Yeah.
So why we would think that would be any different just because we took the same tax dollars and put it somewhere else? I don't know.
And now we have this. Can you see it?
Oh my God. What is that? LGBTQ.
Apparently that was something in a Canadian school.
Okay. That's just insane.
Yeah, it's insane. And then you can see
flag now too.
It's being actively encouraged to disassociate from their body. So there's a little tomboy girl, and now she's non-binary, or at least being encouraged to put herself on some kind of gender spectrum. But
well, all of this exhibitionist, performative, come up to the front of the room and tell us how you're feeling. Come up to the front of the room and find yourself on this identity chart, this spectrum. This is highly inappropriate. This is a boundary violation.
And going back to being able to make a judgment, I believe that's child abuse.
100%. If you wouldn't do it in your own home to your child, it shouldn't be done in the school. Don't let that credential fool you. Just because somebody is a teacher or a principal or a guidance counselor or school counselor or whatever they say they are, social worker, do not be fooled. That gut instinct you have as a parent that this doesn't make any sense and I wouldn't be doing it with my own child, never mind other people's children. That's all you need to know.
Interestingly, I worked on this with a bunch of other people and input from health professional, a health professional, doctor, parents. So it was a group project, but I took the reins on most of it with a lot of the writing, and another parent really helped put together the graphics and everything and do that. And we didn't include some even sort of therapy groups and stuff that I respect, that I think are doing good work as far as trying to challenge the affirmative model. But
right.
She just was she really truly believed, and that parents are having their power taken away from them and their gut instincts taken away from them by the whole therapy culture, and education's the same way.
Yes.
They're being conditioned not to trust their instincts. I think Gabby Clark is an interesting woman. I haven't really listened to her program, but I think she probably says things like that. She's a parent of a desister, and she now helps other people. Maybe people take issue with that because I think she charges a fee. But regardless, I think that's a very legitimate messaging that you don't know what's going to happen with your own child. You can't control your own child when they're a teenager, Lord knows. But a lot of normal parental instinct is being subverted by the therapy culture, the educational culture, and the identity politics culture.
That's right.
And I see that as a sex posy, pro gay rights, pro personal freedom person. But
yep. Exactly. Yes.
Well,
I really hope that parents will avail themselves of this, of the website. Let me go back and show it one more time. The link is down below in the description, but I want to show you guys one more time. This is the website homepage. And
yeah, it's a news site. So that's it's right. I want to have like a news site that competes with Pink News. It's under that. So
yeah, so it's under here, the resource and community for people concerned about all the stuff. And there's so much in here. If you are looking for information to bolster your arguments with your school, with the doctor, with the therapist, with your neighbor, with your spouse, with your kid, you're going to find it on the site. So please, take some time, browse around, share the link with other people, and as we said, be subversive about it. Share it with people in the community anonymously if you're concerned about having it tied back to you. But you've got to get this. We've got to get this information out, because right now the other information that is full of myths is what's dominant, and it will fall apart. I'm optimistic in that I believe it will fall apart in the face of facts. It's just got to be consistent and persistent. You can't give up, and don't be cowed by people calling you names.
Yes.
Anything else that you would like to add as a final note?
Thank you. I love talking to you. You have great insights.
Likewise.
You're very informed on your subject matter, and very interested in alternative education for multiple reasons. Like I know family members who are put on Ritalin, and there's all kinds of things going on.
Yes.
Just drugging boys that are at a time in their life where normally they would be learning how to hunt. It just seems like absolutely also a human rights crime. So in general, birth control might be bad for girls. I mean, there's just all kinds of things, and alternative education is something I'm very interested in. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I do what I can, but as I said at the outset, for those who want to be part of the Reason We Learn community, there's a Discord community at wokescreen.com/The Reason We Learn. Please consider joining, and then we can continue these conversations. Definitely follow Justine on X. I always want to say Twitter, but it's X. And I put everything down below, and it's also in the chat. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you're watching in the replay, thank you for watching. Please like and share. And I guess we will see you guys next time. Have a good one.
Thank you.